Welcome to the Janelle King Show. I am Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3. And we are in for a treat because, here's the thing. When I decided to do my candidate series, I determined that I wanted to do or have conversations with people that's not just on the Republican side, not just on the Democrat side, but I want people in the middle and both and all in between. And some people were like, well, why? Why are you interviewing Democrats? And I just thought to myself, like, because we're in America. This is what America is. If you don't have disagreement, you don't have a country. So I'm going to continue on, and I am so excited to have this conversation with Representative, well, actually it's Senator or former Senator, right? We'll get into all of that. Valencia Stovall, who has done so much in the state of Georgia. And so we're going to just dive straight in because I have a lot of questions and I don't want to take up of her time. So Representative, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Janelle, for having me. And I'm excited about this interview as well.
That's great. All right. So, tell us exactly where you are right now, because currently you're not in office, right? But you were, and you ran for U.S. Senate at one point, but now you're looking to go back to the Dome. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I left office, retired in 2020, and then I was in the jungle race for the U.S. Senate. And then in 2022, I ran for U.S. Congress Congressional District 5. And now I thought that was it until the current senator decided to retire. And then there was a huge request for me from the constituents that I formerly represented to run for Senate, for State Senate, District 34.
Okay, so now you're back in it. Look, I was told that you shouldn't run unless you're asked. So if you're asked, then you got to jump in it.
Yeah, definitely.
So my first question is a question that I've always wondered about, having experience already in the Dome. That's what we call it for those who are not here in Georgia. But that's basically our capital, our state capital. It's where our House and our Senate sit. And so you having that experience, and as well as being someone who's involved in the community, my question is, how do you balance representing the interests of your constituents as well as addressing all the broader statewide issues that you have to vote on as well?
It's not easy. I think, coming into it with having a heart for the people and knowing that was my purpose for being elected from the very beginning. And so with that, it helps me to be able to balance. And of course, having a strong family support and friend network that keep me grounded. So sometimes when I might thinking I need to be going a certain way, they said, no, they pull me back in. So, so that's what kept me grounded those 8 years. And even after that, deciding to take on a statewide race and then coming back again and running for Congress. And now you're running for Senate. So it took me a long time to decide whether I wanted to get back in the political arena because, politics is nasty. And they can kind of cut below the guts a lot. And you have to be strong, with it. But because I have been very successful as a state representative and being able to balance the issues that were going on in Clayton, that was the area I represented, and then being able to look, statewide and being able to, I was able to work across the aisle. So they helped a whole lot with me helping the understanding other people's point of view. So I knew how, my district was, but then I wanted to know the broader picture so that I can be able to best represent my constituents. And even when I'm voting for statewide issues that that's going to affect my district, but other people that live in the state of Georgia.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go back a little bit. But prior to running for office or any of that, where are you from? Are you from Georgia? And what was life like when you were younger? You were a young girl just growing up.
I'm a native of Atlanta, so I am a Georgia peach originally. Both my parents are from Atlanta. I grew up on the southeast side of Atlanta. My dad was very, very active in the community. He's 83 now. He's still active, but of course not as active as he was. But following him around, my mom and dad started a small promotional printing business. And so my sisters and I grew up working in that particular business. So learning, up front about small business development and being able to have things on your own, and you have to work for what what you want to see happen. And then because my dad was active in the community, we were able to pick up on the community side, which was the service side that we continue to do. And even for the work that my dad has done in Atlanta, in the south side of Atlanta, he actually has a bridge named after him on 7585 at University Avenue. It says the Valencia Stovall Bridge. And so, being around him at a young age, he got involved, of course, with politics as well. He was instrumental with the late Mayor Maynard Jackson, the first African-American mayor of Atlanta and of any southern city, with his whole political campaign, the first time he ran and the subsequent time that he served as mayor. And so that's actually where I got my platform tagline, the book, and the ballot, is from, being able to hear him talk about and his community at heart for the service for the people of Atlanta.
Would you say that that's where you develop your political leanings? I know that you're running as a Democrat now. You were a Democrat in the Dome as well, and but you did run as an independent at one point. However, Democrat is typically where you stand. Was that developed as a child, or how did you get there?
Yeah, it was developed as a child. My dad, of course, was instrumental in the Fulton County Young Democrats, actually helped to start the Fulton County Young Democrats. So, being in a household, always Democrat leaning, but still being able to have an independent voice, because sometimes even when it comes down to some issues that may be really more conservative, that you have to decide on. So being able to have that balance as a child helped me to be, when I got to the Capitol. And even some of the people that were actually elected, my colleagues, were people that my dad had helped in the campaign, and I had even campaigned for as well. So, so I wasn't going down as a total stranger. So there were some people I knew and that knew the work of my dad. And like they said, the apple don't fall far from the tree.
So okay, so as we stated, you're currently running as a Democrat, but I do want to talk about you deciding to run as an independent for the U.S. Senate race. What was the quote? Thank you so much for joining the show. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Now back to the discussion. With the straw, I guess they broke the camel's back, or why did you choose to run as an independent during that race?
Yeah, so serving 8 years down at the Dome as a Democrat, and always having a independent mind when I'm speaking and thinking as well. And there were some issues, especially around education and school choice, that I stood very, very firm on, and I wasn't going to back down from that. And of course, traditionally, the Democratic Party is against any kind of school choice when it comes down to what they say public funding and private education, which is a whole nother conversation by itself. And because I always stood firm on that, that caused a lot of discourse within our Democratic Party, the caucus down at the Capitol. And so constantly ostracizing me, not supporting a lot of the bills that I would introduce. So I just got to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm gonna continue to, to fight for the people, and because you're talking about, when you look at parties, there are huge, and a lot of mechanics that goes into it. So a lot of inner working from the ground and behind doors and all of that. And so I knew one person could not go in and change a lot of the processes that have been in place for many, many years. And so I said, okay, since I'm running for U.S. Senate, and it is a special election, which means by state law, I didn't have to go and get any signatures. I said, you know what, I'm going to try it. I'm going to, announce that I'm going to be an independent, and I'm going to run. But my issues and my stance never changed. And that's the whole thing. And even when I decided to run as a Democrat for Congressional District 5, my issues never changed. My stance never changed. And so to me, it's just a title, independent, Democrat, Republican, but what's in your heart, and do you have the capacity to serve the people, which I have a proven track record that I serve my constituents. And so to me, being an independent, it didn't matter because I was still able to work across the aisle without compromising my beliefs.
You know, it's funny because I truly believe that both parties, all parties, whether you're libertarian, any party, is very territorial.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that can be a detriment to a high degree. I went to a breakfast recently with the DeKalb County GOP, and there were individuals running for office that are Democrats that was at that meeting, as well as Republicans. And I felt like we had a very substantive conversation because both positions was represented. And I absolutely believe that it's impossible to think that you're going to have any party is going to run everything. It's never going to be all Republican or all Democrat. So you have to focus in on electing people that are aligned with whatever it is that you need as a constituent. And that's where I think we need to get to in order to really fix this country.
Yes, I agree. And it's unfortunate that you have those that are in the party, like you said, that are so territorial that they can't look beyond that. They have the mote in their eyes, but they can't look beyond. Let's just agree, find an issue that we agree on, which is what I did as a Democrat down at the state capitol. I had Republican seatmates and we would talk all the time. And I wanted to know, well, why did you vote like that? And they would take the time to explain this. So, well, Valencia, why did you vote like that? I would take the time to explain. And then we came to a consensus. Okay, some things we just not going to agree on, but those things that we can agree on, let's work. And then we build a relationship. Then when I may disagree with you, it's not nothing you taking personal. It's just, okay, she has to stand that way because of the people that she represents. And so and I think that's what we need to get to, starting here in Georgia and then spreading national. Let's look at the areas we can agree on. And then those areas we can't, we don't have to touch them right now, but eventually we'll be able to get to them because we'll be able to have a conversation.
Right. No, I agree with you on that 100%. Now you ran against Democrat during the U.S. Senate race. It was Democrat Raphael Warnock. There was a Republican incumbent, Senator Kelly Loeffler, and then it was you who was running as independent. I know there were other people as well, but those were the two that became the front runners. That being said, what set your platform apart from the Democrat or the Republican during that race?
It was kind of what we're talking about now. I was able to see both lenses and understand both lenses and work towards a solution. And also have had experience as a state legislator, although Senator Loeffler had been in the Senate for a little while, but neither one of them had as much experience as that I had, running as a former state legislator. And I believe I was the only one that was a former state legislator that was in the race.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, all right, that makes sense. So let's get into policy. So when you were in the Senate previously, you supported You supported House Bill 426, which was the hate crime bill. And my question around that is, would you agree that hate is something that derives from the heart? So if you were to determine a crime that's considered a hate crime, how do you provide evidence, or and let's say there isn't any, like the swastikas or anything like that being left behind. Let's say it's something that we're kind of predicting that this is a hate crime. How do you determine that under this bill? And why did you feel it necessary to support this bill?
Yeah, so you're right. Hate is determined, from the heart. That is something that who knows what has happened in somebody's past or something that happened currently that just triggers them to not or dislike a person either because of their skin color or because of their sexual orientation or whatever that case may be, that becomes so egregious. And I think being able to look at, and you probably won't, in some cases, won't be able to prove everything, but I think those cases, and this is the way I look at the bills. I don't look at the bills that I vote for as 100% because nothing's 100% because we're all human. And so I look at what is the intent of the bill, and then do I look at it as that the more overwhelming outcome is going to be more positive than the overwhelming negative part that comes from the bill. And so every bill that I look at, that's my viewpoint of how I look at it. I don't know how anybody else does it, but that's how I do it. And so because of that, I looked at if someone, has an egregious dislike for a person and commits a crime against that person, what do we have in place to be able to make sure that victim feels that justice has been served with them when it comes down to that bill? And so that was the basis of me agreeing to the bill. Like I said, I don't agree. I don't know anybody that agrees 100% with a bill. Even sometimes you as the author of the bill may not agree 100%. Of course, you're not going to say that. Right. But that's the way I look at all the legislation when I'm viewing it.
Okay. So continuing the conversation around policy, I want to get into your race. There's something that I noticed on your website that actually made me really excited because, and I can now hearing your story about your father, I think it all makes sense. You have your platform items on your website. And I thought that is so fabulous because we're not seeing that. A lot of times you go to websites and you just see what everyone's mad about, but you don't hear what are you trying to do? What do you want to do? So I want to get into your upcoming race. First, can you talk a little bit about the race, your district? What is it comprised of? And then what are some of the most challenging or pressing issues that your constituents will be facing that you will have to address?
So this Senate 34 district takes in Clayton, a majority of Clayton, like almost half, not exactly half, and then the top half of Fayette County. And so you have two, and it is a challenge because you have two different counties. When you look at economic status, education status, they're kind of two different areas. And so you have to be able to have a balance. And what I always do is I look at what are the positive things that are in the county and where can we build from there? Because I think once you look at solution-driven policies, then everything else, to me, will fall into line. So this district is about 197,000 people that makes up the district. It is majority Black district, majority Democratic district as well. And because of that, especially when you're looking at Clayton County, of being a tier 1 county, you look at, okay, what are the opportunities there with being a tier 1, even though tier 1 is looked at as a negative connotation, but what are some things that we could put in place to be able to help move our county up, because it shouldn't be that being as a metro county and the other surrounding counties are not tier 1. Even I think Spalding County is not even a tier 1 county. And so the way I be looking at it is small businesses, which is part of the book, economic rejuvenation. So how do we make sure that we are sustaining our small business and providing opportunities for new business owners that want to be able to come and open up in both Clayton and in Fayette? And by looking at government accountability, that's one of my huge focuses going to be this legislative session, is that how do we make sure that the departments that we have, whether it's on the local level, state, and even talking with our federal counterparts, how do we make sure those departments are working to the best efficiency for the people that they're going to serve? So we had a small business development center that's located on all of our 4-year college campuses. So how do we make sure, like even in Clayton, and know that Clayton State also services Fayette County, how do we make sure they're maximizing and really those small business owners know and utilize those services? We know that 60% of our small businesses make up the employers in our communities. And so when we're able to sustain them, then we're able to move that economic needle up. And all the other issues when it comes to housing, a lot of times people don't make enough money to be able to afford the housing. Healthcare, that's a whole nother conversation when it comes to healthcare. And so when you're looking at that, and even with education, people move into areas where they believe they have the best education system. And because of that, that's what takes the values of the homes up. That's what takes the amenities and the quality of the amenities increase. It's all because of that education foundation. And that's the other reason why I always have been a strong proponent about education foundation, is because that's what drives our community. So I'll be doing a lot when it comes to apprenticeship programs for our young people in school, and then adults. As far as utilizing our technical college, which is Atlanta Technical College, that service that area in Southern Crescent. I think the service down in Fayette. So how, like I said, going back, how do we utilize what we already have? We don't have to create reinvent the wheel. How do we use what we have to make it better, better service our communities? And then that way, those businesses that are looking for workforce, we have them right there in Clayton and Fayette. They don't have to look outside of there, but they may not even know, just like some of the our citizens don't know, or residents don't know what the opportunities are.
That's interesting. So let's talk about education, because so you have 10 items of focus on your agenda. That's according to your website, which like I said, I appreciate. It was very refreshing to see that. But one of the items was transforming the education system. Now, I know we mentioned school choice, but where exactly do you stand on school choice?
I am 100% for school choice. And the reason I am 100% for school choice, because when I was raising my two children, we lived in the era where the actual school that they was homeschool was not the best school for them, as far as academic wise and providing a type of support that was needed. So as a PTA parent, very involved, like my dad was with us, trying to do what we can to make sure we're supporting the schools. So I'm not against our traditional public schools. I'm not against non-traditional. I just believe that parents should have that right to decide at whatever level their child is at, to decide what's the best educational setting for them. And it may be a mixture. They could end up going into the traditional school. They could go non-traditional like magnet or charter. And then they might decide, hey, my child is matured at a point where they now want to go private. They should have that option to do that. I don't think the government should be able to decide and make people go according to zip code. You must go to this school, because children develop in all types of ways. And when we provide them the best opportunity, what matters to me is that when that child ages out of our school system, they're able to become a productive citizen of our society and being able to give back to society because they've gotten that foundation. What amazes me, Janelle, is that there's so much focus on K through 12 when it comes to public funding to private schools. Nobody ever discusses about pre-K, which is public money going to some of the private pre-K companies. Also, when you look at the GI Bill, you look at the federal Pell Grant, you look at Hope Scholarship, all of that is public money that can be allocated on the post-secondary level to colleges and universities that are private. Our state budget, they just allocated money to go towards Morehouse College. That's public money for them, for building up their the medical center that they have over there in the facilities and services. I don't have a problem with that. My problem is when the discussion comes that is only focused on K through 12. So either we're against private money going to public, and that's on all levels from 0 to post-secondary, or we say let the parents be able to decide where that money goes. Because when you look at it in K through 12, you have parents whose children do not attend our traditional schools. They're in private or they're homeschooled. Right. They still are paying taxes. So now you're saying that you're deciding how their taxes are supposed to go, and they're paying out of pocket for their own child's education, but their tax money is being allocated about 60% when it comes down to local taxes is going towards that traditional school. So why not look at what the accountability should be in that school and how they're delivering education to the students that are attending those particular schools?
That's a great point. And it got me thinking, because I don't think I've ever thought about the fact that we have choice when it comes to pre-K and below. We have choice when it comes to college, but we don't have choice when it comes to, K through 12, which is the most formidable years in development that actually determines what you can do going forward. So that's a really good point. Why do you think it's such a hard discussion on the Democrat side?
Well, a lot of times when you've been structured to believe and think one way the whole time, and if you're not open to a conversation to say, hey, maybe our thoughts on that, really should change. Yeah. So they're going to stick with it. Same thing, even with the Republicans on some issues, they're going to stick with it. And so that's why when I said being able to work across the aisle, and one thing is that everything starts with a conversation. Being able to ask me, hey, Representative Stovall at that time, why do you feel so strong about school choice? That never was a conversation that was had with my Democratic colleagues. Only a very few, but not in totality, to ask me why in the area where I represented that was not of high income, why do you feel like that? It's because I've seen where the children, I believe, could have done a whole lot better had their parents been able to make that decision. And even if we gave accountability to the education system of where they are going to school, we talk about wasteful spending and everything else. When are we going to look at where's that spending at in our traditional schools? We say fully fund education. Okay, when Governor Deal was there, we came up, I served on the Education Reform Commission, and we came up with a formula. Why is that formula still sitting dormant? Why are we not activating on that formula? Then we don't have to have a conversation about public and private funding, because it's all about the child. To me, everything is about the child and making sure they have a foundation that they need.
That's a great point. That's a great segue too into my next question, which is also associated with your policy positions and your platform. You've mentioned student-centered funding. I think you kind of may have answered this, but I want to kind of make this a question, a standalone question. What exactly is student-centered funding in your definition, and how do you plan to implement it?
So student-centered funding, in my definition, is where the funding is centered on the child. So whatever the needs are on that child. So like I said, on the Education Reform Commission, if anybody want to go back, it was the recommendation was completed in 2015. And so on there, it gave a base amount, and then according to the needs of that child, an additional funding was layered on top of it. So if you had a child that was gifted, they got additional funding. If you had a child that was special needs and lived in a low income area, they got additional money for special needs, additional money for living in an impoverished area. So that's what I say that is centered, because now you know that that child is getting what he or she needs from the funding. And so it's going to take a lot of people changing, and that's usually the hardest thing in education, because we've been doing it like this. But then you keep hearing fully fund the QBE. That is an old formula. So much stuff has changed in our society when it comes to, and even now after COVID, we really need to make sure that we're doing student-centered funding, because there's such a huge learning loss. And how do you make up for that? The school districts don't have the whole capacity. That's why they got to reach out and bring community in to help look at that child, whole entirety of that child, the holistic way. But they can't do it just being themselves, but being an island by themselves. They have to reach out. And when you see those communities, those schools that have learned how to reach out to the community, to the businesses, to the nonprofits, and bring them in, you've seen differences in the performances of those kids, and not just academic performance, but also social responsibility type of performance with those children. They're happier. They're happy to come to school. And that's what children, it should look like. And so you asked about, what things I would continue to push and ask my colleagues, where are we on this funding formula? Why can't we pull it out of the closet, dust it off, and see what other things we need to add to it? You have great people who worked on this formula for a long period of time, and they understand how it needs to work. And so we just need to come together to make sure that we dust it off. Just like we talked about the state income tax being changed, that we are looking at having a consumption tax. I think that was one of the questions I think I saw on the Republican ballot was about a consumption tax. Do you want state income or consumption tax? And so if we're looking at that, why not we're not looking at education that takes up almost 55 to 58% of our state budget is going towards education.
Right. No, that's a great point. That's a great point. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to another topic because I can talk about education all day too. You also are focusing on supporting small business growth. And one of the things you say on your platform is support the reform and innovation of financial services. Can you provide examples of some of those specific financial services you would like to reform or support, and how would they actually promote business growth?
Okay, so if you take the example that happened during COVID, and I'd like to I always like to kind of go back to talking about COVID, because that was a point in all of our lifetime that we never saw before. But rules and policies that we thought could never be changed, all of a sudden they were changed. And it was more openness when it came down to small businesses. So even when you look at the EIDL loan, the PPP loan, and all of, even though there were some people that took advantage, over advantage of it, but the ones that really were able to benefit off of it were able to sustain their business during that time where they were no longer being able to have business to come through on a profit level. So when I talk about looking at our financial services, are we really being able to utilize the best when it comes down to our small business and helping them sustain themselves? So I go back to the Small Business Development Center. They offer great classes for small business owners. You have the Chamber of Commerce across the state that offer, great services. So how do we maximize on that, being that SBA?
Thank you so much for joining the show. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Now back to the discussion.
It is a federally funded program that is allowed, like I said, on the different campuses. And so when you look at the services for financial services, really being able to help those small businesses, don't just let them come in and say, okay, you need to make sure this is done with your finances. How do we go a step further by holding their hands and say, we're going to walk you through the process? Because if you walk them through the process, then later on, you don't have to worry about getting into trouble because you have walked them through the process. And now with so many, what we call gig workers, so many creative minds, how do we make sure that they're getting the support that they need? Because a lot of them missed out on being able to get the PPP loan, the ones who were honest, because they did not have their paperwork in order. So how do we have that? We look at government contracting on the state, on the local, the state and federal level. Are our small business really being able to compete and know about those contracts that are available, that long-standing contracts that can help sustain a community? So that's when I talk about those finances. Looking at the bank, that there's a money that banks that are in certain communities have to reinvest back in, the community reinvestment money. So are our small business really being able to maximize on those in those communities where those banks have depositors? And a lot of times it does not happen like that. And so that's when I talk about financial services. How do we look at what is already there and making sure that those who are interested and who qualify, and even if they don't qualify, how do we get them put them on the road to be able to qualify, to be able to take advantage of these opportunities?
That's a great point. And I kind of have like a real world example of why bringing these agencies and what they do to the community works. Because of years and years and years ago, when our now governor was Secretary of State, I brought him to East Point and I promoted it as like, if you were wanting to start a small business, if you are, interested in business at all, come and meet the Secretary of State. The number of people who didn't understand that the Secretary of State's office has resources to help you to grow your business, not just help you start the business. The amount of people who didn't understand that blew me away. And then I found out years later that one of the guys that came to that event actually emailed the now governor, then Secretary of State, and he responded. And he gave him some information and pointed him in the right direction. So there is a benefit to bringing these organizations to your district and to your community for sure. Now, for the sake of time, I want to get into one other issue that you have, or I say agenda item that you have on your platform, and that's voting and reparations. Your bullet points state that you would like to support universal voting education for youth and adults to include the roles of elected officials, support collaboration of leaders and community to develop and implement measures to redress, repair, and restitution for the descendants of the chattel slavery in Georgia, increase citizen engagement in multi-agency planning and implementation. Now, when we hear reparations, we immediately go to cutting a check, but I didn't hear any mention of like financial support, which I'm actually not opposed to. But what does universal voting education entail, and how would that be implemented effectively?
So, of course, anytime you hear the word reparations, there's always a red flag that goes up to those who are not sure or those that are against it. And so with me putting that into my platform is that kind of going back to what I talked about earlier. What we've been talking about is that small business development and growth. Yeah. And there are, even though it's not, stating there about cutting a check, but eventually it will be a check, because when you look at the totality of reparations that should happen in the state, and it starts with a conversation. And I think this, like I said earlier, is sitting down and what does that look like? I don't know what it looks like, but if we have intelligent people that are in this state that can decide what does that look like for the state of Georgia, because each state is different. And so when you talk about universal voting, it's all about empowerment and education of our voters, of our citizens. And so when we're looking at that reparation, a commission needs to be formed. And on that commission, it needs to be varied people on that commission that can be able to bring the information that we need. And that commission needs to have some teeth to it. We don't want to just meet. We're tired of meeting. I go to meetings all the time. I'm about solutions. So how do we bring about the solutions that are going to be good for us here in Georgia? And the more that we continue to close our eyes or turn our head, it's not going anywhere. And so until we address it, the redress on it, then we can be able to move forward. And I know there are a lot of people that don't understand. They think, oh, blacks are all right. You all now, you had were you able to apply for a job, and because of your color, we had to, to look at you moving ahead. It's more than that. When you start looking at LBJ or Johnson during that time of housing, redlining, all of that falls into dealing with education, because there were certain schools put on certain areas and they didn't receive the resources they needed. And that's kind of when I introduced legislation about zip code, eliminating zip code requirements when it comes to education. Because of all that housing, certain blacks could not move in certain areas when it came to housing. Certain banks would not give loans to black businesses because they were black businesses. These are facts. These are not things that I made up. They're in the history books. So how do we not repeat history by going back and resolving those things that have been left up in the air? And eventually it's going to drop down, and it's dropping down now. So why not go ahead and stay ahead of the curve? We're already behind, but why not let it get worse? Let's sit down, talk about what that reparations committee, and if you want to change the name, I don't have a problem with changing the name, long as the end outcome is what's needed for those who are descendants of chattel slavery. Then that's what I'm for.
So when it comes to reparations, there are things that I agree with, and there's things I don't agree with. I personally think school choice is a form of reparations. It's allowing you now to not be forced to go somewhere simply because that's where you live or that's what they're saying. I believe that there are providing access to information, meaning bringing, as you talked about, bringing the small business agencies to the community so that they know these things are out there, to me, is a form of reparations. I think one of the biggest issues is that while there are things that has changed, there are policies that has come into play that now open up more opportunities. I don't think a lot of people in our community know it exists. I don't think they know how to get it. I don't think they know where to go or who to talk to. And if we are not providing that middle piece, then we cannot look for results on the back end. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that I agree. There are people that don't know about it. And I don't focus on people who not going to come and do anything. I don't focus on that. That's time wasted to me. But those who want it and may not have known about it, yes, we are doing our community a disservice by not providing that information. But along with that, when they get there, they still have to have that help to get them to where they are. And I'll give you a very quick example. My family, Stovall Enterprises, back when the Georgia Dome was first built in 1991, we were the first black company to have a joint venture partnership with a major merchandising company at the Georgia Dome. And we handle all non-food. So if you came to the Dome from 91 to 2008, we were the ones running the concession stands for non-food. So jerseys, merchandising. That's what we did. But had not Mayor Jackson at that time put into place for contract compliance to allow for that minority participation, we would have never been able to have that opportunity, because we didn't have the money to be able to compete against that major merchandising company. But because of contract compliance was in place for any contracts in the city of Atlanta, even though it was at the state, it was a state-run facility, but it was within the city of Atlanta. So that gave us, a small Black business, an opportunity to be able to be on that top level when it comes to performance, and being able to deliver services that otherwise we would not have had the opportunity to have. So I think in those instances, you still, because they're still there, that barrier is still there. I don't care what nobody says. And so being able to have those companies the ability to hold their hand and make sure that that majority company is doing what they agreed to do in that contract that they signed as a joint partnership is essential. Because there were many times that major merchandise did not send us our portion of the money that we had worked for, being there. And so we had to have interference in somebody to come in and run the interference to say, hey, this is the contract you signed. You're not doing it, because we couldn't afford no lawyers. We were a small business. That merchandising company could pay off all the big lawyers and still come down on us hard because we couldn't afford to compete. So we had to use a political strength to make them do what they're supposed to do. That should not have been like that, but that's a reality. So that's why I said, yeah, once we get them there, we have to have accountability. We're holding their hand on both sides to make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, to make sure at the end that it's a successful partnership.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes this subject of helping the Black community is always pushed onto the Democrat side as if Republicans never did it. And this is stuff that I think Republicans has perpetuated, not necessarily coming from the Democrats. But Ronald Reagan was known for bringing in a lot of Black leaders into departments and department heads to help to facilitate this type of to try to break down those barriers that you're speaking of. And I don't think we talk about that enough as we're on the Republican side. Right. So I do think there is a middle ground to this subject, but both sides have to kind of come up off of their corner stances and decide to meet in the middle. So I appreciate you taking the tough questions. Now, before I ask you to go into how people can follow you, find you, and support you, I like to throw in a little bit of very much so, very lighthearted, not serious questions. And they're would you rather questions. Now, they're supposed to have short answers where you just kind of give it without any explanation. So let's see if you can get through them. And they're very lighthearted.
Okay, let's go.
All right, let's go. All right. Number one, would you rather have a wardrobe full of designer shoes or designer handbags?
Designer handbags, because I don't know how to wear. Well, you said without explanation. So, okay. I can't help it. My folks always tell me I have an explanation for almost everything. So I'm gonna do right this time. So I would say handbags.
Okay. Would you rather have the ability to instantly style your hair perfectly every day or always have flawless makeup without effort?
Style my hair instantly every day.
Okay. Would you rather have unlimited campaign funding so you can face constant accusations? Would you rather have unlimited campaign funding? However, you will face constant accusations of being bought out by a special interest, because that's what they say, or rely solely on grassroots donations but struggle with limited resources?
I would have unlimited funding for campaign.
Okay. Last question. Would you rather have a smart home with automated everything but no privacy, or completely analog home with full privacy but everything was manually controlled?
I don't know about that manual control. I would say the first one.
Automated. Thank you so much for participating in that segment of the show. I always like that. I think our listeners love it because it just allows you to see the fun side of candidates because we're not always super serious. Now, that being said, as we're closing, please share how people can find you, how they can support you, and any closing response that you would like to have to those who are watching.
Yeah, thank you again, Janelle. I really enjoyed this segment and being able to express my viewpoint, for my campaign and even my past choices. So you all can find me at ghostovall.com. I'm on social media platforms, Facebook at Valencia Stovall GA, on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Valencia Stovall. Leadership matters, and it matters at the state capitol. And having someone that's bold, accessible, and have proven in the past of being able to get things done. I brought $45 million to Clayton County because of the loss of the jet fuel taxes. I've been able to make sure that Atlanta Clayton Farmers Market recognizes that it does sit in Clayton. That was something that was very huge for us, as I sat as the chair of the House Study Committee for the revitalization of the state farmers market. Also being able to recognize our Georgia single parents every year, March the 21st, which is my second piece of legislation that I authored and was able to get passed. Being able to author and co-author over 24 bills that are actually signed into law, being as a Democrat in a Republican-controlled legislature means a lot. That means that I already have the proven track record to be able to work across the aisles, hosting the Educate Georgia Summit for 3 years, bringing over 1,000 people together to talk about the future of education in Georgia. So if you want someone who is committed to the people, has a proven track record, then remember, Stovall, that's all.
I appreciate you sharing that. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I heard a lot of great ideas. I really hope we can have more of these conversations as we continue. I would love to bring you back later on to talk about, your race, considering that I'm hoping you'll be in the general. So we are excited to have you back, but I really want to have more of these conversations. There's a way to fix some of these problems. And I think that it's going to start with us being in the political arena, me on the Republican side, you on the Democrat side, coming together and saying, this is what the people want. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you.